terrific presenters, topics, and talk about really shortening the learning curve for, looking at what has happened in other markets. I gave you some examples in the West, and what the current situation is here in emerging markets with respect to, physicians, other stakeholders, and the change in that, and maybe share some real life experiences with some of the panel members here. So I think to kick it off, what I'd like to do is reflect back to some.
I was never fascinated by that. I actually said there has to be a good team to run that, monitor it well, and leave it alone. The problem that we face is that we look at tweaking current things to build alternate models. And this is exactly what we tried in the organization that I work for not to do. Let us solve the real problem. If the alternate channel is a problem-solving one, it needs to be done. For example, I will give you an example from a real life from an earlier company of mine. Yesterday we actually discussed that, Suresh and I discussed it at the McKinsey forum, is that I found that in dialysis business, having sales reps or account executives and increasing them by the size of nephrologists in the country was a ridiculous way of working. So I actually reduced the sales force from 40 to 10 and increased nursing field force from 5 to 120. And that was the problem to solve. So now, was it an alternate channel in trying to see what the sales force were doing? No. And I gave you one example to showcase the point that many a times we try tweaking things and solve the wrong problem. We need to solve the right problem. So I think Bob, that's what my experience has been, that we always need to focus on the right problem and not look at alternate channels to only augment things that we are doing.
Thank you. Maybe Suresh, you could comment on some of the obstacles that you've seen within your own organization as to,
expectations on what you read of the market. And in saying that, like for example, let me quote, Pfizer recently got into neuroscience. Typically, if you look at neuroscience, we have very well-entrenched established players. So you have the Sun Pharmas of the world, the Intas of the world, and many more companies, Abbott, in the top 5. They're so very well entrenched, and they have a one-stop shop approach from a portfolio point, and they kind of lived and grown with the doctors. So big time entry barriers. So how do you therefore get into this market, and your competitors have 500 people working, seeing doctors day in and day out. So if I want to go with an original old world model, it's just about saying how many reps do I put in, who are the key doctors that I would have as target customers to in year one, what will be my share of voice there compared to competition and things like that, marketing. But doesn't need propel you to starting something like this. What is the basic core need? And I think that has to be very well defined. And I think very often change management becomes easy if you've got that well defined, and you will have investment and execution coming hand in hand, and the buy-in is a natural follow-up. So that's my end. Just to complete the story, we didn't ramp up the field force, but we did bring out an innovative model. And the whole thing was based on the fact that how do you help the doctors improve outcomes, right? And when you ask that question, a doctor becomes your partner. And in that case, how do you therefore construct a business model that helps you do that? And then we ask the question, meeting a doctor with a...
Have you been given from headquarters to be able to, make this change happen? Or is it still, there's some of the old guard that says, well, try it out, but still make your numbers, don't do anything drastic?
Making up numbers, there's no let off. So that needs to happen. That's the reason for being. But hey, I will not do this. And maybe I have therefore some kitty to invest. So In terms of selling and freedom to operate, you have the freedom as long as you don't spend more money. You have the freedom as long as you meet your numbers. I mean, that's probably a little too harsh, but I think we did get a buy-in from the organization. I mean, it's all a question of how you read the market and how you set it upstairs as well. Like I said, if you have defined the problem and if you have a reasonably thought-out solution, you have people buying into your model, and then that brings in an ease with which, relative ease with which you could probably start managing a change.
Marketplace that you're in, because there is a universal access to all measures of technology. Can you kind of comment on how you've dealt with that, in your planning process for the marketing mix?
Yeah, so just to first comment and continue a little on what Suresh was saying regarding basically identifying a need and then trying to address that need in terms of whatever alternative channel you take up. So, for example, one of the maybe instances we could share is the experience of our launch of Build-A-Kit, where when we had the prospect of launching this product, we had a team of just 25 people, and we were facing a competitor that's just next to me, who already had 200 people on the ground. So we had this huge challenge of matching the share of voice, and no way our mother was giving us those 200 people, 300 people we needed to match the share of voice. So the manner in which we addressed this, whether through our internal realignment of field forces, but we really took one leap of faith over here. We went in for a partnering model in India, which I think was at a very early stage in its inception in India. We not only partnered with one company, that is US Returns, and at that time we have to appreciate the kind of dilemma which was before the company. Internet penetration in our country is not to the extent that it is in other markets. So when we talk of using alternate channels, webcasting, etc., Milind did mention some of the challenges they faced in those kind of countries where there was less bandwidth, etc. But in India, this is a huge infrastructure problem. So how do we address these issues in a country where the internet penetration per se is only 10%? But mobile penetration is say 70%. I mean, we all know this very peculiar imbalance which we have in our country. So perhaps there is some kind of an opportunity over here. The other thing which I was just reading about recently, that
within the last 2 years, is that several of the major and some of the mid-tier pharma companies are actually developing what's called apps for mobile phones, predominantly the Android or the iPhone platforms, that are either patient-friendly and in one case will help a patient track the vaccine status of their children and when new doses are due and where to get a flu shot. There's one on diabetes and how to monitor your glucose, control input it, and see peaks and valleys. Or Shri, have you seen any of that in your marketplaces? If there's universal almost coverage with cell phone technology, or a lot higher than there is internet access, are companies effectively utilizing this in emerging markets?
Okay, so I get the trick question. No, I think firstly, mobile penetration in the Gulf, I'll speak for the Gulf where I'm from, is extremely high. There's anything from about 1.5, sometimes over 2 mobiles per person. So penetration is not an issue. In terms of mobile apps, I've not seen much yet. Of late, I've seen some of the clinics and so on adopting the technology. Recently, one of the clinics in Dubai have released their own app in which a patient can see whether the doctor is available, book their own appointment, and there's, from what I understand, some two-way communication from the clinic as well, where the patient can be instructed to go and do some blood work or whatever prior to the appointment. In terms of pharma companies at this stage, I've not seen anything specific for the Gulf yet, but I am aware of.
Gaurav mentioned some time back about one of the work that they are doing with Indigen for some time, and that is in the space of internet usage for knowledge dissemination for physicians at large, and that is one place where we're looking at mobile application. We don't have as of today for that, but we're looking at that as mobile application because some of the doctor, again, it comes back from the customer inside that how they want to access the information. So if the customers, they come back and tell me that, look, I travel from clinic A to clinic B and to clinic C in the metro town, and I do that maybe twice in a day, and I spend probably 1.5 hours in the car. Can mobile application can be useful for me? So I don't want to read anything, but if I get to know about a capsule of some information which is getting released. So we are hoping that that kind of application would really delight the customers, and maybe next 2 months down the line we'll have some answers to that question, saying that the mobile application, how useful that will be from accessing the information perspective.
Though I'm yet to see some meaningful foray into these two areas, but what I can foresee is two things. One is when you remove the burden from the patient on kind of recording his disease and health. One is, and then put it on record as and when he comes on treatment. You have a history based on which you can improve outcomes to him. That's one. The second is that these apps also enable the doctor and the patient, or the caregiver and the patient, to be continuously in touch, and therefore, in terms of managing outcomes and continually kind of advising the patient, you are able to either provide a pharmacoeconomic advantage, better outcomes for the patient. So there is a win-win for everybody involved. So clearly, this area holds a lot of promise, but how it will play out, how soon it will play out, that's something that's got to be seen. But it's a good time for a lot of pilots.
One of the things that is becoming more and more popular in the United States with respect to actually a link between personal promotion or rep promotion.
It really happening in a big way. I can only tell you about an experiment which we did when actually we launched we did an experiment by trying to put a DVD on for uniform messaging, ensuring that the message doesn't go wrong when you're creating a new category. And we used the DVD player with very specific messaging that every rep would deliver. And we gave a very high quality film to do that message. The uniformity of the message was enormous. We also therefore could create a feedback mechanism on the message that was being delivered. So it was
the ability to communicate the basics of any kind of communication. So you may change that paper folder into a digital format, but ultimately if that rep has the knowledge, the confidence, the relationship, he's able to get those 3 minutes of real attention, that's what really matters. So that's our success. That's the reason why we are still watching and seeing whether it's just another fad or it's something which could really make an impact in terms of how we communicate.
Good point. Kind of reflects back to when we at Merck many years ago first did computer-based detailing. So we actually were programming detail pieces onto the laptop, and it was in the very early stages of it. We tested it in 3 regions, but we also gave them the option to use sales literature. And we found that there was no decrease in the use of sales literature when we gave them the option, obviously. And then the next part of the experiment is we took it away from them totally. And they figured out ways to print out the sales literature on printers and still use it rather than go to the technology. So I think it's a good point that you made in that, we have to, not only our sales reps, but our customers have to appreciate the value
that, and then very soon it will lose the novelty. Right. So the point is that if I have to discuss every time something new, something which is relevant for the customer, and through the technology I can get it quickly, like whatever happens tonight, tomorrow morning it's available on my machine or my device, and you can use it effectively in the customer chamber. I think that is the true value that can be unlocked. So just talking about a tablet or a machine is not going to be the solution. That is A, and B is that the adoption process, if you want to really accelerate it. When the rep gets kudos from his customers, when he sees the customer delight, then there is a faster adoption of it. So in some of the cases that we've seen that wherever that new thing has worked, then there is a demand coming up from the field force saying that when can I
to the audience, and you get that initial wow with the technology, but you don't get any lasting interplay. And so, at least in the U.S., where the tablets have worked effectively, is in their ability to have changing and tailored content to the individual customer audience. And that's difficult in our industry because we're very regulated and everything has to go through a med-reg process and whatnot. But what we're seeing, at least in the U.S., are the med-reg boards are coming more on board as to this is the changing customer marketplace. We need to adapt to it. We still have to stay on label for the brands, obviously. We have to minimize our risks with respect to product liability, but we need to communicate with our audience in the way they want to be communicated to.
To the patient, you should be able to compare control group to patients on this service. Is the compliance to the drug improving? If it is improving, what is the delta? If the compliance is improving, are the parameters, and in this case we tested HbA1c, we tested fasting blood glucose sugar levels, we tested lipid levels, we tested the overall management. In 12 months, you are sure that the outcomes in the long run are going to be much higher. And you had a calculation, a rough calculation by knowing compliance rate going up. What is the amount of economic value add this product was delivering? So you could measure it. It may be not a real-time measurement in terms of really, it's an alternate way of measuring things, but this clearly showed how much value such initiatives can deliver to you.
Well, I had one experiment we ran in Dubai, specifically on hypertension, and it's a compliance tool. It's a container, for lack of a better word, that you can put in the foil of medication every time it's opened. A GSM signal sent via cell phone tower to a server, which then measures the compliance of the patient. Every opening is counted as a compliant event, and then the patient was part of a study group looking at blood pressure control versus a non-intervention group. And quite clearly, I mean, blood pressure was much better controlled in the group that had the device versus those that did not. And the rate limiting step really becomes the cost that you are incurring when you do this. I left Novartis before we got to the point where you can actually see, at what point can we withhold the device and the patient will remain compliant, or at what point has this device now fully paid for itself and you can let go of it. But there are these type of tools coming out, and I believe in time will probably be a bit more affordable.
Thanks.
Just want to make a comment.
Sure.
It is one thing to construct financial ROIs for this, but I'd like to look at it in two ways of efficiency and effectiveness. What's the cost of a missed call? And that cost is not calculated. It doesn't clearly come in, or what's the cost of a call that's not completely optimized? That's a difficult call to make. But that being said, I think the first step towards optimizing that call is striking relevance. And what also heard about how retail organizations react quickly to the consumer. Every week, they sit in meetings and change prices and kind of come Monday, their strategy for the week is ready. So the cycle times are a week for the retail. Now, pharma is they're a little cushioning. You've got elbow room. And so 3 months, 4 months cycle, which is when we do the cycle change of printing a new visual aid and communication. Now, I think what this tool can help do is to help differentiate by reacting quickly. There is SARS or there is what have you. Your ability to kind of react to the market. There's a study coming in. I mean, I'm saying in multiple
nations. I think, from our presenters, we heard, at least I heard, two drastically different, kind of influences patients have. China doesn't seem like patient value is something that is being looked at right now or in the near future, where I think in other emerging markets, and particularly here in India, the patient is becoming, more a part of the healthcare equation. How do you guys view patient value services, and how do you figure these as a component of the marketing mix for your organizations? Maybe should we comment?
I think there's a long way to go. I mean, the other day we had advertising agencies, and they're talking about they were reviewing our materials and giving us some advice. So they were asking lots of questions actually about the patients, about what is the lifestyle, and their lifestyle, how your drugs they fit into that, and what impact they create. So we have tons of knowledge about doctors and what doctors they do, what they prescribe, what they don't prescribe, what are the drivers for prescription. But I think when it comes to the patient, I think our knowledge is fairly limited.
Because our scripts would be lasting that much longer. But getting back to your question in terms of how do we add value to the patient, we are in the infancy really, still in the Gulf, in terms of the governments are starting to realize what type of problem they're dealing with. Just by way of example, in UAE, cardiovascular death rate in Abu Dhabi increased by 2% year on year. Word of diabetes, 20% prevalence, coupled to hypertension and dyslipidemia. You've got a time bomb of cardiovascular disease. So you're not going to stop the people that are over 30 from getting advanced cardiovascular disease. What's needed is education at a very young age and real interventions at a young age. And,
we have a great chance in emerging markets to learn that patients and patient groups, and one great example in the United States is the breast cancer patient group, which really drove until research. NGOs, we had to learn the hard way in the Western world that NGOs in AIDS can sometimes bring companies to knees. The public-private partnerships that Europe learned after much hardships. The stakeholders in the healthcare chain, which is providers, insurance companies, driving therefore what is good from a health economics point of view. All these learnings have happened in the Western world, and we are just waiting. We are just waiting that someday, whenever it happens, it hits us, we will also learn. The time is not far off when this is going to hit all of us. So we are in a good position to learn this very, very quickly from the Western world. It's not just patient groups, but there are several other learnings which if we keep. And I give you a simple example that payer.
Currently when you look at the smartphone penetration, you might really not. You can say that even the rate of mobile phone penetration in India, it's about 3 years too early or 4 years too early. But I'm also encouraged to look at the e-Chopal initiative. I don't know if you've had a chance to know about it. It's about farmers sitting in distant land benefit a lot. So currently it's not happening, but I see trades go.
Just one more comment on this. Something very, a little more specific to our country. I think many of us may be aware that the way business was done in India, most of the field force had access to patient information, especially in the specialty and chronic care area. So even though this is not as per certain companies, very quickly to bridge this gap. And that's why I think all of us are currently in, and we are trying to.
Yeah, and I think we faced a similar situation in the U.S. with the HIPAA laws, and that obviously manufacturers couldn't know anything about their patients, and there had to be a firewall in between there. And I think there have been some pretty successful steps in trying to address some of these patient value initiatives, but continue to have that firewall in there so that it's done on a blinded basis, whether it's a patient registry run by an outside organization or through a society like the Breast Cancer Foundation or something like that. The U.S. manufacturers have been able to provide grant support and hopefully improve the value equation along the road. So maybe in the last couple of minutes we could throw it open to any questions that you might have from the panel or for the panel.
And for my brand, because we had a recent experience with that, that's why I can say that clearly. But technology, is it really going to help us so much in India at this point in time? That's the question I want to put across. Considering the situation that we have in India, it's a public market, you have doctors working in solo practices, you have physician needs which are much more different than what they're in the Western world, at least currently. And to some extent, there's a question that needs to be asked. Are we in India really not trying to follow what's happening in the West? This is iPads are happening in the West, so sometimes someone has to come to India and let's try to implement it, rather than just getting the basics right. So I just want to understand from the panel, is it really going to be impactful from a marketing mix perspective? That's one. Second is there some amount of element which will, create some sort of a dissonance within compliance when we have technology, or is it really going to ease things for compliance?
Today we can do that with the technology for 1,000 doctors at one go, where a panel is talking from one place and 1,000 doctors across the country, they are listening to it, or probably they can ask questions, interact. So technology is enabler in that sense. But what I think at no point of time technology can substitute our understanding as a marketer of the customer, their issues, their challenges, and how our products and services fit into that. So I think that's I believe is a fundamental.
What about just following the Western world, giving to India, doing the same thing that our parent companies are doing in the US, Europe, and bringing the same thing here? Or is it that we want to improve things here in India? So that's still a thought process challenge that I'm facing right now based on the discussion that we're having out there.
I think the answer really lies with yourself. In the sense of, is there and can help facilitate value creation in that interface, then I'd say, go for it. In my mind, the iPad is, if you're thinking of it as just a detail aid, don't do it at all. Okay. If you're thinking of it as a tool through which you can be really flexible and customer focused, putting some insights from the customer and giving something to the customer at the same time, I'd say go for it. So really the power is in your hands, and I think nothing more to say.
One is there is no replacing a face-to-face, sales pitch or whatever you want to call it. How do you do it? Can you do it better? Can you bring in technology enablers? Are they? Whether you choose to do it through medical reps or someone else, that's different. Whether you go to the doctor or the doctor comes to you, that is also different. So, whether you meet the doctor through the net, or whether you virtually, or whether you meet them face to face, that's different. Now, basically, you need to take it one step at a time. As the cloud clears and your visibility improves, that's what it is. Does it make us more contemporary? Does it improve our speed and ability to? There are things that will keep people alive, and so the question is, what works for you now? There is no changing the medical rep. He will be there, but can you empower him to do more things? Or is he just a key message deliverer? That's a key question. Yesterday, we were talking to a man from the interest, and therefore, they use the manpower to areas where they are likely to close a deal. So it's all up to how your business model will evolve. To make a lofty statement to make. So I think as the cloud clears is when we will know what to do, when, and how to take it forward. But one thing is for sure, the engagement with the doctor that we choose do it through medical rep today can be enabled through more means than just a rep. Today, a rep is the only media that we use by and large.
Using medical rep, and going ahead with what Suresh said, using medical rep to convey a message about your product is a very narrow and shallow way of thinking of how you approach the market. Physician access is going down significantly, places after places, for share of voice. And as you heard from Bob, 31% no rep show in the United States. Physician access is not going down at all, but actually increasing for share of mind. If you are solving that guy's problem, which he faces, there is enough access. You don't have to tell him to go and raise his banner and say that you use my antibiotic. So, in the marketing game, most companies are trying to move on and understand that physician access is all about share of mind and not share of voice. The earlier we learn it, the better it is. Many countries in the Western world learn it quite late.
Just to extend that just because this is a very interesting topic, and maybe just to go a little different note. As Sanjeev rightly emphasized, understanding of that marketplace and then mapping the role of your rep there is very critical. And if we look, I was just reflecting how the things have changed in the industry as I have seen them. Today we have got, alongside the medical rep, we have got a key account manager, we have got a MSL, medical science license, we have got a patient advisor. Now, all these roles, 5 years back or 3 years back, in our own organization, we not rule out that every country market differs in the business model that we are in. Considering India, definitely right now, correct me if I'm wrong, we have around 1 lakh reps working in the market. And according to a recent study, this number can go up to 3 lakhs in the next 5 years' time. So I don't think we can rule them, but we have to definitely be patient to take a decision apart from a doctor or the products they have. One is the role of pharmacists, which is increasing in a very big way. And of course, you mentioned the patient caregivers or those who work with the patient, they decide for the patient. How do you proceed to help or influence these? I would call it 2 most important parts of the patient who decide for a product in the market. This is one. Second is, of course, there is some talk going on in the government sector that India being a generic market, that tomorrow it might so happen that there might be a policy that the doctors cannot prescribe brands anymore. Rather, they have to write the generic names. And if that happens, what will be the business model or scenario like? So these are the 2 questions I have.
Whatever. It's going to be very difficult really to get to that value interface. I think it's much easier on the specialty side. If we're looking at something like an MS product, really assisting the patient there to help reduce symptoms, improve their quality of life, and their integration into their families, that type of thing, through nurse educators, that's really where we could make a huge difference. How does the rep, what is the role of the rep there? I think the rep is really an enabler or connector, but as the rep play the role there, it shouldn't. The rep shouldn't be with it much. On the mass market side, I don't know.
We have not seen, I'm not aware of too many companies doing this, but definitely this is something which we need to explore for reasons well understood. And last Sunday I was at a forum which was being hosted by an organization called Retina Foundation. This is a patient advocacy group which has been created, which is self-created, and we were like just supporting and participating. And it was a very interesting experience for us, because as I said, we are also learning on this. A hall full of almost 750 blind or visually disabled people, addressing a panel of health secretary, the under secretary, etc. Each one of them first came up in stalls outside. When I go to these stalls, each machine costs 30,000 rupees. The whole presentation which we heard from so many speakers, each one came and talked about new visual aids and whatever, low vision aids. They all cost 10 and 20,000 rupees. What is the government doing to help us on this? So that really put those guys on the back foot and really made, I think, would have triggered some kind of thinking. As industry watching this interface, I think it also triggered.
Get that happening. Government is not a payer, so clearly that situation to happen in India will take some time or probably will be very difficult. But in the event that happens, who are your customers now? You need to define that, and what resources you need to reach across to them. The game changes, and therefore your stakeholders in the whole game change, and you need to map them. That's a short answer. Clearly, would you package your products in the same way? Your own approach. Maybe you brand your company as Sandoz, than a tablet. Probably you will. Yeah. So the whole game changes, and therefore one would therefore have to look at a new stakeholder map and see who's more important and then play the game accordingly. You can't maintain your 3,000 reps up to the, I don't know how much Sandoz has these days, 1,500 or whatever. You can't say that and you can't stay status quo and yet.
Abbott. I have two questions. I'll start with the first one. Most of the industry in India have adopted technology in a big way. And in fact, in certain industries, we've taken a leadership stance. We've got leaders from the pharmaceutical industry sitting here today. And my question to them is, why is the pharmaceutical industry so slow on adoption?
What's the other one? The pharmaceutical industry might be street side of many other industries, many other things. So it's about which sphere are you talking from an industry point of view. And if you're restricting to sales and marketing, I think because the conventional model of the relationship between a doctor, rep and a company has not changed dramatically. Usage of technology will always limit itself between playing within the interfaces. But the force of technology will make people adopt this. And I can tell you a simple example. I have a business intelligence guy sitting here. The simple thing is the equations start changing and more stakeholders that in Western world we have seen that more stakeholders start engaging yourself, you will have no choice but to adopt technology. So somewhere there is a question of no choice situation and whether are you learning that. So the question is valid to an extent, but already it is changing beneath your feet.
And when you talk to the agency, they feel that, they say that they're waiting for the industry to fund it. And when you ask the industry, they say that they are waiting for the agency to come with more data, which will perhaps help the marketeers in coming out with more focused strategy for their brands. So we've got the agency and we've got the leadership here, and the question is, who's going to take the leap here?
Or data is there. My simple thing is, how could you convert them into insights? How do you use insights into making hypotheses? How do you go and test them out in the market and then ultimately arrive at what's relevant to your customer, what you want to do to your customer? So I agree there is this gap somewhere, but I think the key thing is how do we convert the information and the data that we get into insights? That's I think the key. We spend a lot of time, Sanjeev and I, and a whole lot of people on this insight deficit in the industry today. And I think that's what your question is reflecting. There is more focus and there's more need for the marketing and the country leaderships to kind of focus this on to probably help your case in being more effective, and being more efficient, so that you could channelize more money into something that you think will work, and everything becomes evidence-based. So you're right, that's how I would take it, that there is an insight deficit, and how do we kind of group together to bring in those insights will be critical.
They must be doing that, they must have done already a lot of work in the space of what really consumers, what really doctors or patients they want, and how they want to learn, and how they want to understand the new things, what media they want to utilize in what fashion. And B is that how does it translate into good ROI? Because when you're wanting to make change at marketing minds in the organizations, many times the data points are available to
maximum possible extent possible. Who blinked first? Was it the industry? Was it the agency? And how did this entire development of data happen in that market? Because that will probably help us to construct data for this market if we have
decrease the space between yes and no in a decision by collecting more data, then that's good. But you have to do it in a timely manner, in an efficient manner, so that it pays off in the long run. Otherwise, if I have all the data in the world, I don't need a bunch of managers helping me make decisions. So I don't know what enough data is, but certainly you don't need anywhere near the data that we have in the Western world.
And just counting on your experience
in middle management in making a decision where they would go back and ask for more data and say, okay, well, before we do that, why don't you do a market research study on this, or go get IMS to do a data run and look at these different subsets of that, and then come back to me, and we'll talk about it. So, and that just got to be the norm, time and time again. So, I don't think the agencies had anything to do with it, to be honest with you. I think it was all internal from the manufacturer side.
The second thing is really there's an overload of, shall we say, outcome data. You look at a lot of data which is post facto. You get prescription data, sales data, etc. But I guess the question that you're asking really is what makes a doctor prescribe a certain product or choose a certain line of treatment over something else. In the way people manage diseases, given a certain patient profile, how do X number of doctors lead as a...
Something I read someplace, maybe from an old wise pharmaceutical sage, that said share of voice means nothing if customer goes deaf.